My name is Stella, and I am a widow in my early 30s. Life hasn't been easy since my husband passed away 3 years ago. Every day feels like a battle, but I keep going. Recently, something strange has been happening. I keep losing money. At first, I thought I had misplaced a few dollars, but now it's more frequent. This morning, I checked my wallet again, only to find another $100 missing. I searched everywhere, my bag, my drawers, even the pockets of my coat, but I couldn't find it. My heart pounded with worry. Was someone stealing from me? I live with my in-laws. After my husband's death, we leaned on each other for support. My mother-in-law and father-in-law lost their only son, and I lost the love of my life. We were bound by grief. My husband had always been my protector, my rock. Even in his last moments, he smiled at me and whispered, "Leave it to me." His words still echo in my mind. But now, as I face financial struggles alone, I wish he were here. Losing money in a household that once felt safe makes me feel uneasy. Who could it be? I first noticed the money disappearing a few months ago. It started with small amounts, just a few dollars. But soon it became $50, then $100. I began doubting myself, thinking I had spent it without realizing. But after withdrawing $11,000 for living expenses, the numbers no longer made sense. I knew something was wrong. There were only 3 of us in the house: my father-in-law, mother-in-law, and me. My father-in-law was away at work most of the day. That left only one possibility, but I didn't want to believe it. Could my kind and caring mother-in-law be stealing? I needed proof. One evening, I left my wallet on the dining table with $70 inside. Hidden inside my bag was my phone, recording everything. I went about my usual chores, heart pounding, hoping I was wrong. Hours later, when I checked the footage, my breath caught in my throat. There she was, my mother-in-law, reaching into my wallet and taking the money. She didn't even hesitate. My hands trembled. Why would she do this? Was she in trouble? My heart ached. I wanted to confront her, but I hesitated. How could I accuse the woman who had supported me? I decided to say nothing, hoping she would stop. Maybe she needed help, but was too ashamed to ask. Instead, I took on more work, doing extra shifts at night to cover the missing money. I told myself it was temporary. But as days passed, the theft continued. The weight of the truth pressed down on me. One night, as I walked to my late-night shift, memories of my husband surfaced. He used to hold my hand on cold nights like these, keeping me warm. I sighed, feeling more alone than ever. I had to do something. One night, as I stocked shelves at the convenience store where I worked, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and froze. My father-in-law stood there in his suit, looking exhausted. "You've been working late," he said, his voice filled with concern. My stomach tightened. He thought I was sneaking out to meet someone. "Father, it's not what you think," I blurted out. He studied me carefully, waiting for an answer. I couldn't lie anymore. I pulled out my phone and showed him the recording of my mother-in-law taking the money. His face darkened as he watched. My father-in-law sat in silence, his hands clenched into fists. When the video ended, he exhaled deeply, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. "I didn't want to hurt her," I admitted. "She's suffering too." His shoulders slumped. "We've all been suffering." I nodded, feeling the weight of grief settle between us. He wiped his eyes and looked at me. "Leave this to me, I'll handle it." His words reminded me of my husband's last promise. Leave it to me. A shiver ran through me. Something told me this was just the beginning of the truth. Weeks later, my father-in-law and I witnessed something shocking. We had just finished talking outside when we saw my mother-in-law walking arm in arm with an unfamiliar man. They laughed, their faces filled with warmth and intimacy. My father-in-law stiffened beside me. His voice was tight. It seems I wasn't the only one losing sleep. My mind reeled. Who was this man? Was this why she had been taking money? My father-in-law turned away, his face pale. I had never seen him so shaken. Whatever this was, it was bigger than stolen money. It was betrayal. The next morning, my father-in-law did something unexpected. He hired a private investigator. Weeks later, he placed an envelope on the dining table. My mother-in-law opened it and gasped. Inside were photos, her and the man entering a hotel. Silence stretched between us. "Do you still see him?" my father-in-law asked, his voice quiet but firm. My mother-in-law's lips trembled, but she didn't answer. "This isn't new, is it?" I blurted out, unable to contain my thoughts. My father-in-law closed his eyes. This started before our son was born." My breath caught. The truth was worse than I imagined. My father-in-law revealed the past. Years ago, before my husband was born, my mother-in-law had an affair with this man. She almost left her family for him. When she discovered she was pregnant, she chose to stay. But doubts lingered. "I always wondered," my father-in-law admitted, his voice breaking. "Was my son really mine?" My heart clenched. My husband had never known this secret. Had he ever suspected? My mother-in-law buried her face in her hands. "It's not like that," she whispered. But the damage was done. Her betrayal had resurfaced, tearing our fragile family apart. The most devastating truth came next. My father-in-law had proof. My mother-in-law had been taking my stolen money and giving it to her lover. "You stole from Stella to support another man?" he asked, his voice raw with pain. My mother-in-law flinched. She didn't deny it. A cold, sharp pain spread through me. The woman who had comforted me, who had shared my grief, had been deceiving me all along. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. My father-in-law shook his head. "It's too late for apologies." The weight of betrayal was too heavy to bear. That night, my father-in-law made a decision. "You need to leave," he told my mother-in-law. She sobbed, pleading, but he stood firm. "You were never honest with me. Not then. Not now." My heart ached, but I knew he was right. She packed her things, her eyes avoiding mine. As she walked out, she paused. "I really did love my son," she said. Then she was gone. The house felt emptier than ever. My father-in-law sighed, running a hand over his face. "We'll be okay, Stella," he said. "We still have each other." I nodded, hoping he was right. After my mother-in-law left, the house felt eerily quiet. My father-in-law and I sat in silence, staring at the empty seat she once occupied at the dining table. "It's strange," I murmured. "I thought I'd feel relieved, but all I feel is hollow." He nodded. "She made her choices, and now we have to live with the consequences." Though her betrayal hurt, part of me still felt sympathy. Losing her son must have left a void she tried to fill in the worst way. But sympathy didn't erase the damage. We had to find a way to move forward. One evening, my father-in-law hesitated before speaking. "Stella, can I ask you something?" His voice was laced with unease. I looked up, sensing the weight of his words. Do you think my son was really mine?" The question made my chest tighten. He had carried this doubt for years, never daring to voice it. I thought of my husband, his laughter, his kindness, his stubborn determination. And then I saw it, the same traits reflected in the man sitting before me. I smiled softly. "You raised him. You loved him. Blood doesn't define family. He was always yours." Winter passed, and spring arrived with quiet hope. My father-in-law and I settled into a new rhythm. Without the burden of secrecy and betrayal, life felt lighter. One day, as we sat in the backyard, he chuckled. "You know, Stella, you don't have to rush to leave. This is your home, too." I smiled, warmth filling my chest. "Thank you. But one day, I hope to find love again." He nodded. "When you do, make sure he's worthy of you." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. Maybe, just maybe, happiness was possible again. One evening, as I stood outside, I looked up at the night sky. The stars twinkled above, reminding me of my husband's words. Leave it to me. A tear slipped down my cheek, but this time it wasn't from sorrow. I think I'll be okay, I whispered. Behind me, my father-in-law stepped outside, a cup of coffee in hand. Talking to him? He asked. I nodded. He sighed, gazing at the stars. Maybe he's watching over us. I smiled. Maybe he was. And as the wind carried away the remnants of our past, I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow